The revolutionaries of warfare, engineers who changed history. The steel ramps of the Higgins boats crashed down into the frigid waters off Normandy's coast, and with them crashed centuries of military engineering evolution into a single moment. As young men rushed through the surf toward Hitler's Atlantic Wall, they carried with them the inherited genius of generations, weapons designed by minds they'd never know, vehicles conceived in workshops they'd never see, and battle plans shaped by innovations they'd never fully comprehend. This is a story about the quiet revolutionaries of warfare, the men who fought their battles not in muddy trenches or on blood-soaked beaches, but in workshops and laboratories, over drafting tables and through countless failed experiments. They were artists, dreamers, and sometimes deeply flawed human beings who fundamentally changed how humans wage war. Their weapons killed thousands, saved millions, and ultimately reshaped civilization itself. From Leonardo da Vinci sketching tanks by candlelight in Renaissance Italy, to Mikhail Kalashnikov hammering out his first rifle designs in a secret Soviet workshop, these 5 engineers transformed warfare from a contest of muscle and sword into the complex mechanical dance we know today. Their stories span 5 centuries and 3 continents, connected by a single thread: the relentless drive to solve the unsolvable, to imagine the unimaginable, and to build machines that could move mountains or reduce them to rubble. Some called them geniuses, others called them monsters. But they were something far more interesting. They were engineers. And their creations didn't just win battles, they revolutionized the very nature of human conflict. This is their story. Leonardo da Vinci, the Renaissance warrior inventor. The Duke of Milan's candlelight caught the glint in Leonardo da Vinci's eye as he unfurled his latest military drawings. It was 1482, and Europe was about to witness the birth of modern military engineering, though it would take centuries for the world to catch up to what this singular genius had conceived in his workshop. Leonardo wasn't supposed to be a military engineer. The illegitimate son of a Tuscan notary, he'd carved out a reputation as a painter of extraordinary talent. But beneath the delicate brushstrokes of the artist lurked the mind of a mechanical revolutionary. While his contemporaries were perfecting the sword, Leonardo was imagining how to obsolete it entirely. In his infamous letter to Duke Ludovico Sforza, Leonardo barely mentioned his artistic abilities. Instead, he sold himself as a military innovator, promising secret and tortuous tunnels, indestructible tanks, and weapons that would spread terror among the enemy. This wasn't mere Renaissance resume padding. His notebooks would later reveal designs so advanced that NASA would study them centuries later. The tank came to him first. While others saw horses as the ultimate battlefield weapon, Leonardo envisioned an armored turtle of wood and steel, powered by human muscle and capable of moving in any direction. His design solved problems that wouldn't become apparent until the first real tanks rolled into battle in 1916. He added angled armor to deflect cannonballs, placed the crew in a carefully designed compartment, and even included a primitive periscope system. The only significant flaw in his design, the backward-facing gears that would have caused the tank to move in the wrong direction, was likely intentional, a subtle act of sabotage from a man who later wrote of the bestial madness of war. But the tank was just the beginning. In his workshop, Leonardo conceived the first multi-barrel gun, a predecessor to the machine gun that wouldn't emerge for another 4 centuries. He designed giant crossbows that could hurl burning projectiles over castle walls, portable bridges that could be rapidly deployed across rivers, and steam-powered siege engines that presaged the Industrial Revolution. Most revolutionary was his understanding of human anatomy as it related to killing machines. Leonardo would spend nights in charnel houses dissecting corpses to understand how bodies broke. This macabre research led him to design weapons with terrifying psychological efficiency. His famous scythed chariot, bristling with whirling blades, was engineered not just to kill, but to terrify, understanding that fear could be as powerful as steel on a battlefield. Yet for all his martial genius, Leonardo's greatest military innovations never saw battle. His notebooks remained private, filled with his distinctive mirror writing, perhaps hiding secrets he wasn't sure the world was ready to receive. He would often start projects with explosive enthusiasm, only to abandon them when new ideas captured his perpetually wandering attention. The real tragedy wasn't that Leonardo's designs were never built, it's that they were too perfect, too advanced for the metallurgy and manufacturing capabilities of his time. He designed precision gears that couldn't be cast, weapons that required materials not yet invented, and machines that needed power sources centuries away from discovery. Like his famous flying machines, they were dreams waiting for technology to catch up. But catch up it did. 5 centuries later, when the first armored vehicles crawled across the battlefields of World War I, they embodied principles Leonardo had sketched by candlelight in his workshop. When the first helicopter took flight, it owed a debt to his aerial screw designs. Even modern drone warfare echoes his dreams of weapons that could strike from afar without risking the operator's life. Leonardo died in France in 1519, his military genius largely unknown beyond a handful of Italian princes. His last words, according to tradition, were, "I have offended God and mankind because my work did not reach the quality it should have." Yet his military designs, hidden away in notebooks that wouldn't be fully studied for centuries, had already laid the foundation for modern mechanical warfare. The artist who painted the Mona Lisa's mysterious smile had conceived something far more enigmatic, a new age of warfare where machines, not men, would dominate the battlefield. It would take 5 centuries for the world to fully understand what that candlelit workshop in Milan had spawned, and we're still grappling with the consequences today. Werner von Braun, from V2S to moonshots. The rocket pierced the edge of space on October 3, 1942, leaving behind the world's first vapor trail to touch the stars. In the control bunker, a tall, aristocratic German engineer watched his creation climb through the stratosphere, knowing he'd just changed warfare forever. Werner von Braun had just launched humanity's first ballistic missile, and with it, the threshold of death had moved into space itself. At just 30 years old, von Braun embodied the terrible paradox of military genius. Brilliant enough to touch the heavens, yet bound by earthly loyalties that would haunt him forever. The son of a Prussian baron, he'd grown up in a world where rocket societies were more common than radio stations. While other boys played with toy soldiers, young Werner built fuel injection systems in his basement, nearly burning down his family's estate more than once. The Third Reich recognized his genius early. While Hitler ranted about wonder weapons, von Braun and his team at Peenemünde were actually building them. The A4 rocket, later renamed the V2, was unlike anything the world had seen. It flew faster than the speed of sound, reached the edge of space, and delivered its payload with a precision that made conventional anti-aircraft defenses obsolete. No one could shoot it down, no one could outrun it, and no one could hear it coming. But success came at a horrific price. The V2 facility at Mittelberg employed slave labor from concentration camps, working in underground tunnels where more prisoners died building the rockets than would die from their deployment. Von Braun later claimed ignorance of the worst abuses, but he'd visited the tunnels. He'd seen the workers. He'd chosen to keep building. The Allied bombing of Peenemünde in 1943 scattered von Braun's team across Germany, but couldn't stop their work. As Berlin crumbled, he led a daring plan to preserve their research, hiding 14 tons of documents in an abandoned mine shaft. While other Nazi scientists destroyed their work, von Braun was already thinking ahead to what would come after the war. He surrendered to American forces in 1945 with a bold proposition. America could have the future of rocketry, already packed in crates and ready for shipping. Operation Paperclip whisked him and his core team to New Mexico, where the US Army was eager to learn the secrets of their former enemy's most advanced weapon. The transformation that followed was remarkable. The man who had built Hitler's terror weapons became America's preeminent space evangelist. He appeared on Walt Disney television specials, describing moon missions with the same enthusiasm he'd once reserved for missile trajectories. When the Soviets launched Sputnik in 1957, von Braun became America's ace in the hole, the man who could catch up to and surpass the Soviet space program. His redemption reached its apex with the Saturn V rocket, still the most powerful machine ever built by human hands. The same mind that had calculated V2 trajectories for London now plotted courses to the moon. The engineers who had once designed weapon systems now built life support systems. The organization that had brought terror from the skies now aimed to touch the stars. Yet even as he reached his greatest triumph, von Braun never fully escaped his past. Every launch carried the ghost of Mittelwerk. Every advance in rocketry bore the fingerprints of decisions made in the service of the Third Reich. He died in 1977, decorated with NASA's highest honors, but still wrestling with the moral algebra of his achievements. The ultimate irony of von Braun's legacy lies in how his work transformed both warfare and peace. The intercontinental ballistic missile child of the V2 became the backbone of nuclear deterrence, making war between major powers too costly to contemplate. Meanwhile, his peaceful rockets opened the space age, giving humanity its first steps into the cosmos. In the end, von Braun's story proves that military engineering, like the rocket engines he loved, operates in equal and opposite reactions. The same principles that can lift humanity to the stars can also bring death from above. The same genius that can unlock the heavens can also unleash hell on Earth. This duality would define not just von Braun's life, but the entire Cold War era that followed. Robert Folton, master of sea and steam. Paris, 1797. As Napoleon's armies redrew the map of Europe on land, an American artist turned engineer was about to reshape warfare at sea forever. In the murky waters of the Seine, Robert Fulton was testing a craft that would haunt admirals' nightmares for centuries to come, the world's first practical submarine. The Nautilus slipped beneath the waves like a mechanical sea serpent, its copper-clad hull gleaming in the murky depths. While other inventors had dreamed of underwater vessels, Fulton had solved the fundamental challenges that had drowned their ambitions. His design included compressed air storage, hand-cranked propulsion, and a revolutionary diving plane system that would influence submarine design for the next 2 centuries. What made Fulton different from his predecessors wasn't just technical brilliance, it was his artist's eye for design. Before he became an engineer, he'd earned his living painting portraits in London's finest houses. That same attention to detail, that same understanding of form and function, now shaped his approach to military technology. Every curve of the Nautilus was designed not just for efficiency, but for stealth, making it virtually invisible from above. The French Directory, initially skeptical, watched in amazement as Fulton demonstrated his creation's lethal potential. The Nautilus could remain submerged for hours, approach enemy ships unseen, and attach explosive charges to their hulls. It was the perfect weapon for a nation trying to break Britain's naval supremacy. But when Napoleon took power, he dismissed the submarine as unworthy of the rules of warfare. Fulton, undeterred, took his ideas to Britain, the very nation he designed the weapon to destroy. But submarines were just the beginning. Fulton's mind churned with visions of mechanized warfare that would have seemed like science fiction to his contemporaries. He designed steam-powered warships when most navies still relied entirely on sail. His torpedo, actually a naval mine, could destroy ships worth fortunes with devices costing mere dollars, fundamentally changing the economics of naval warfare. The American government finally recognized Fulton's genius in 1810, commissioning him to build Demologos, the world's first steam-powered warship. While European navies still maneuvered with wind and tide, Fulton's creation could move in any direction, regardless of weather. It was the death knell for traditional naval warfare, though few recognized it at the time. Yet Fulton's most profound impact came from his civilian innovations. His commercial steamboats transformed America's rivers into highways of commerce and military logistics. During the War of 1812, while his naval weapons protected American harbors, his steamboat designs allowed troops and supplies to move upstream against the current, a military advantage that would prove decisive in countless future conflicts. The final irony of Folton's career came in 1815. After catching a cold while salvaging a shipwreck in freezing waters, he died before seeing his greatest military creation, Demologos, completed. The ship that would revolutionize naval warfare was commissioned the same day as his funeral. Folton's legacy lives on in every modern navy. His basic submarine design principles still guide nuclear submarines. His steam propulsion innovations evolved into the engines that power today's warships. His understanding of underwater explosives laid the groundwork for modern naval mines and torpedoes. But perhaps his greatest contribution wasn't any single invention. It was proving that the ocean itself could be engineered. By showing that technology could master the seas, Folton changed not just how wars were fought, but how humans viewed their relationship with the world's oceans. The artist who began by painting landscapes had ended by reshaping them, turning the seas themselves into a canvas for military innovation. Barnes Wallace, the bouncing bomb maestro. In the spring of 1943, a peculiar sight graced the waters of Britain's Kent coast. Steel drums, spinning backward at precise velocities, skipped across the waves like massive stone-skipping champions. Behind them stood a bespectacled engineer with a stopwatch, muttering calculations under his breath. Barnes Wallace was perfecting what many considered impossible, a bomb that could bounce on water. The genesis of Operation Chastis, later immortalized as the Dam Busters Raid, began in Wallace's garden. Using his daughter's marbles and a washtub full of water, he discovered that a perfectly spherical object, spinning backward, could skip across liquid surfaces and maintain a straight trajectory. It was the kind of observation a child might make. But Wallace saw what no one else had, the key to breaching Germany's supposedly impregnable dams. The Myrna and Eder dams protected Germany's industrial heartland. Traditional bombing couldn't touch them. Torpedoes would be stopped by anti-torpedo nets, and direct hits from above would merely glance off their curved surfaces. But Wallace's bouncing bomb, codenamed Upkeep, would hop over the protective nets, sink to the dam's base, and detonate at the exact point where water pressure would amplify the explosion's force. But the challenge of creating the weapon was astronomical. The bomb had to be dropped from exactly 60 feet above the water, at precisely 220 miles per hour, spinning at exactly 500 revolutions per minute. The margin for error was negligible. Get any variable wrong, and the bomb would either shatter on impact or bounce wildly off course. The RAF's best pilots would need to execute this precision attack at night under heavy fire. Wallace wasn't just fighting physics, he was fighting skeptics within his own government. Many dismissed him as a crackpot, including some who mockingly called his project throwing marbles at a battleship. But Wallace had a secret weapon, his unshakable faith in mathematics. Every bounce, every rotation, every trajectory was calculated with slide rule precision. The raid, when it came, vindicated Wallace in spectacular fashion. On May 16, 1943, 19 Lancaster bombers of 617 Squadron took off carrying his bouncing bombs. By morning, 2 major dams lay broken. The resulting floods devastated Nazi Germany's industrial production, proving that precision engineering could accomplish what brute force could not. But Wallace wasn't finished revolutionizing aerial warfare. His next creation was even more ambitious, the earthquake bomb. Traditional bombs exploded on the surface, but Wallace's tall boy and Grand Slam bombs were designed to penetrate deep into the earth before detonating, creating artificial earthquakes that could destroy targets. Conventional bombs couldn't touch. The mathematics behind these weapons was revolutionary. Wallace calculated that a bomb striking the ground at supersonic speeds would act like a liquid, penetrating deep into the earth before its delayed fuse triggered. The resulting underground explosion would create a cavern, which would collapse, causing seismic waves that could destroy structures from below. The 12,000-pound tall boy and 22,000-pound Grand Slam became the most feared bombs of the war's final years. They could penetrate 16 feet of concrete before detonating. They sank the battleship Tirpitz, destroyed V-weapon sites, and collapsed railway tunnels that had seemed impervious to attack. Yet Wallace was no mere destroyer. After the war, he turned his genius to supersonic flight, designing variable geometry wings and new principles of aerodynamics. His swing wing concept would later influence aircraft like the F-111 and B-1 bomber. The same mind that had calculated how to break dams now worked out how to break the sound barrier. Perhaps most remarkably, Wallace refused to patent his wartime inventions, believing that work done for the nation in its hour of need shouldn't be exploited for personal gain. He continued teaching and innovating well into his 80s, more interested in solving new problems than profiting from old solutions. His legacy extends far beyond the spectacular raids that made him famous. Wallace showed that precision could be more powerful than payload, that mathematics could be mightier than mass production. In an era of increasingly sophisticated guided weapons, his principle that brains trump brute force remains more relevant than ever. Mikhail Kalashnikov, the people's weaponsmith. In a frozen hospital bed in 1941, a wounded Soviet tank commander sketched furiously in his notebook. German weapons had decimated his unit, and as he recovered from his injuries, Mikhail Kalashnikov became obsessed with a single question. Why did German soldiers have better guns than his comrades? The answer would lead him to create the most successful weapon in human history, the AK-47. The son of Siberian peasants, Kalashnikov brought a unique perspective to weapons design. While other engineers pursued complexity, he understood something fundamental about warfare. A weapon is only as good as its weakest user. Growing up fixing tractors on a collective farm had taught him that simplicity wasn't just elegant, it was essential. His breakthrough came from studying the failures around him. The Soviet PPAH submachine gun jammed in the mud. The American M1 Garand was too precise for mass production. The German STG-44 was revolutionary but overcomplicated. Kalashnikov took their best features and ruthlessly simplified them, creating something entirely new, a weapon that would work everywhere, every time. The genius of the AK-47 lies not in any single innovation, but in its holistic design philosophy. Its loose tolerances meant it could be manufactured by relatively unskilled workers. Its simple mechanism could be maintained by soldiers with minimal training. Sand, mud, ice, or jungle humidity, the AK-47 kept firing. It wasn't the most accurate rifle, the most powerful, or the most sophisticated. It was simply the most reliable killing machine ever created. Testing was brutal. Kalashnikov's prototypes were frozen, baked, submerged in water, covered in sand, and dropped from heights. When parts broke, he didn't just replace them. He redesigned them to be stronger. When mechanisms failed, he simplified them. The result was a weapon so reliable that its testing officers initially refused to believe the results. The Soviet state adopted the Avtomat Kalashnikova 1947 with unprecedented enthusiasm. Its simplicity meant it could be manufactured anywhere that could smelt steel. Within decades, factories from Bulgaria to China were producing variations. The weapon became a symbol of revolution, resistance, and in many cases, terror. Its silhouette appeared on flags and coat of arms. It even ended up on the currency of some nations. But unlike many weapons designers, Kalashnikov lived to see his creation's full impact. He watched it arm both sides of countless conflicts, appear in thousands of photographs of violence, and become the weapon of choice for armies, insurgents, and terrorists alike. By some estimates, there are over 100 million AK-47s and its variants in circulation, one for every 70 people on Earth. The moral burden weighed heavily on him. Late in life, he wrote to the Russian Orthodox Church, questioning his responsibility for the deaths his invention had caused. "The pain in my soul is unbearable," he wrote. I face the same question. If my rifle cost people's lives, does that mean that I, Mikhail Kalashnikov, aged 93, a Christian and an Orthodox believer, am responsible for people's deaths? Yet Kalashnikov's impact transcends the weapon itself. He proved that reliability trumps perfection, that simplicity defeats complexity, and that the ability to work in the real world matters more than performance in ideal conditions. These principles now influence everything from smartphone design to space vehicles. The final irony of Kalashnikov's legacy is that his weapon's greatest strength, its simplicity, made it impossible to control. Unlike complex modern weapons, the AK-47 can be manufactured in virtually any machine shop, repaired with basic tools, and mastered by users with minimal training. It democratized lethality in a way no other invention has before or since. Kalashnikov died in 2013 at 94, outliving most of his contemporaries and many of his critics. His weapon continues to shape conflicts around the globe, a testament to the enduring power of functional simplicity. In the end, the peasant boy who just wanted to defend his homeland created something that transcended nations, ideologies, and time itself. A tool so perfect in its simplicity that it became both immortal and uncontrollable. When steel dreams take flight. The drone hovers silently above a modern battlefield, its artificial intelligence processing more data in a second than Leonardo could have sketched in a lifetime. In its silicon brain, von Braun's rocket science merges with Wallace's precision targeting. Its communication systems, reliable in any condition, echo Kalashnikov's principles of rugged simplicity. Below, autonomous submarines, spiritual descendants of Folton's Nautilus, patrol the depths with nuclear hearts. We stand at a crossroads that would have fascinated our 5 engineers. Artificial intelligence is reshaping warfare, just as gunpowder once did. Autonomous weapons platforms make decisions at speeds that surpass human capability. Hypersonic missiles, traveling at 5 times the speed of sound, compress the space between decision and consequence to mere minutes. Yet the fundamental challenges remain eerily familiar. Modern military engineers still wrestle with the same questions that haunted their predecessors. How do you balance lethality with control? When does innovation cross the line into abomination? What happens when your creation exceeds your ability to contain it? The answers are evolving faster than our ability to process them. Quantum computers threaten to shatter the encryption that protects nuclear launch codes. Bioengineering opens the door to weapons that could rewrite the human genome. Nanotechnology promises swarms of microscopic assassins that could reshape matter itself. But perhaps the most profound shift isn't in the weapons themselves, but in the nature of conflict. Cyber warfare has made traditional boundaries meaningless. A teenager with a laptop can now theoretically cause more damage than a World War II bombing raid. The next great military innovation might not be forged in steel at all, but coded in silence, its battlefield the invisible infrastructure of our connected world. Yet history suggests caution in predicting warfare's future. Leonardo's tanks seemed impossible until they weren't. Von Braun's rockets appeared to be science fiction until they touched the stars. Wallace's bouncing bombs defied physics until mathematics proved otherwise. Folton's submarines were dismissed as fantasy until they revolutionized naval warfare. Kalashnikov's rifles seemed too simple to succeed until it became ubiquitous. The pattern is clear. Today's impossible is tomorrow's inevitable. Somewhere, in a laboratory or workshop, the next great military engineer is already at work. Their creation might harness quantum mechanics, bend artificial intelligence, or exploit some principle we haven't yet discovered. But like their predecessors, they will change the face of warfare in ways we can barely imagine. What's certain is that the cycle will continue. Each innovation will spawn its countermeasure. Each advance will reveal new vulnerabilities. Each solution will create new problems for future engineers to solve. The only constant is change itself, driven by the relentless creativity of those who dare to reimagine the art of war. As artificial intelligence begins to design its own weapons, as autonomous systems make their own targeting decisions, as cyber warfare blurs the line between peace and conflict, we must ask ourselves, what would our 5 engineers make of this brave new world? Would they recognize their principles in our precision-guided munitions? Would they see their dreams in our drone swarms? Would they approve of where their innovations have led us? Perhaps the greatest lesson from their combined legacy is this: military engineering isn't just about building better weapons, it's about understanding humanity's relationship with conflict itself. Each of our 5 engineers thought they were solving tactical problems, but ended up reshaping strategic realities. They weren't just building machines, they were rebuilding the world. The future of military engineering lies not just in new materials or methods, but in new ways of thinking about conflict itself. As we stand on the brink of an era where machines may decide the fate of battles, where algorithms might determine strategy, and where the line between human and artificial intelligence grows increasingly blurred, we would do well to remember the human element that drove each of our 5 engineers. For in the end, they remind us that the greatest military innovations don't just change how we fight, they change who we are. And in that truth lies both promise and warning for whatever comes next.